the federal government threatened legal action after carmaker Stellantis said it will move planned vehicle production from its plant in Brampton to Illinois, sparking fears about the future of Canada's auto industry.
Yeah, we know this with pleasure. My heart goes out to the people in Windsor and Brampton and elsewhere, but I do believe this is the beginning of the end. I'm not for Canada, for the auto manufacturing industry, not.
Something strange is unfolding in North America's auto industry. A decision that was supposed to strengthen America's hand, but is now quietly unraveling the logic behind it. Not long ago, Stellantis, the parent company of Jeep, Dodge, Chrysler, and Fiat, announced a major shift. It would relocate production of the Jeep Compass from Brampton, Ontario, to Belvidere, Illinois. On paper, it looked like a patriotic win for Washington and a painful blow to Canada. In reality, it may become one of the most expensive miscalculations in modern auto history. The move seemed strategic, a preemptive response to Trump's new 25% import tariffs on vehicles built outside the United States. By producing inside American borders, Stellantis hoped to sidestep billions in potential penalties. The decision fit neatly within the company's $13 billion plan to expand domestic manufacturing and add 5,000 American jobs. For a moment, markets and media celebrated the news. "American jobs are coming back," headlines read. It was the perfect soundbite until the numbers started to sink in. Within days, analysts began warning that the U.S. might not be the safe harbor Stellantis had imagined. Labor costs in America are among the highest in the world. Energy prices have been volatile. Compliance with Buy American rules adds red tape and limits flexibility in sourcing. What looked like a patriotic comeback suddenly started to look like a trap. In Canada, the response was swift, but not panicked. Prime Minister Mark Carney and Ontario Premier Doug Ford didn't lash out or posture. Instead, they leaned on precision. Canada reminded Stellantis that it had signed binding agreements to maintain its manufacturing footprint, including operations in Brampton, in exchange for billions in public support. Behind the scenes, Canadian officials activated the legal safeguards built into those agreements, clauses that could make it extremely costly for Stellantis to abandon its commitments. Ottawa quietly prepared to enforce penalties, ensuring that even if the company shifted production south, it couldn't walk away clean. It was a subtle move, part diplomacy, part deterrent, and it set up a fascinating question. Had Canada just been outplayed, or had Stellantis stepped right into a trap of its own making? The initial financial results offered the first clues. Within a single trading session, Stellantis shares dropped sharply. Investors saw through the patriotic optics and zeroed in on the numbers. Relocating manufacturing to Illinois meant higher wages, costlier energy, and stricter labor rules. By the end of the second quarter, the company had absorbed hundreds of millions in extra costs. And that was just the beginning. When the tariff package took effect on April 3, 2025, it flipped the logic of global car manufacturing overnight. A 25% import tax on all vehicles and light trucks built outside the United States didn't just affect foreign brands. It disrupted Stellantis' entire supply chain. For years, the company's operations had relied on a complex ecosystem of parts and sub-assemblies crossing borders seamlessly between Canada, Mexico, and Europe. The tariff turned that efficiency into a liability. Suddenly, European-built components were more expensive. Cross-border shipments slowed under new compliance checks. Every part of the process, from materials to finished vehicles, became tangled in cost and delay. Within months, Stellantis reported nearly $300 million in new expenses directly tied to tariff-related disruptions. By mid-year, its net losses had reached over $2.6 billion. Analysts at major financial institutions began issuing warnings. If current conditions persisted, the company could see as much as $7 billion in earnings impact by year's end. Production lines across Michigan and Indiana faced temporary shutdowns. 2 Jeep models imported from Mexico were suspended entirely. Nearly 900 U.S. workers were placed on furlough as the company scrambled to recalibrate its operations. Trump celebrated the development as proof that his tariffs were forcing companies to build American again. But on the ground, the reality was harsher. The tariffs had forced automakers to move, but not necessarily to thrive. Stellantis wasn't alone in its struggles. The broader U.S. auto sector began to feel the ripple effects of higher input costs, slower logistics, and collapsing efficiency. Meanwhile, north of the border, Canada's strategy began to pay off. Rather than reacting emotionally, Ottawa had prepared methodically. Officials reminded Stellantis that its previous EV investment commitments, signed in 2022, legally required it to sustain certain employment and output levels in Ontario. Any reduction could trigger penalties. By leaning on those terms, Canada effectively anchored part of Stellantis' operations in place. Even as the Jeep Compass production left Brampton, component manufacturing and EV-related work remained. Ottawa's insistence on accountability, combined with provincial retraining programs, softened the blow for workers and communities. Ontario expanded its workforce transition plans, retraining more than 2,000 Brampton workers for new roles at NextStar Energy, the $5 billion joint EV battery venture between Stellantis and LG Energy Solution. The project entered its operational phase in Windsor, creating more than 2,500 high-quality jobs and establishing the region as a central hub in North America's electric future. Within 6 months, the numbers spoke for themselves. While Stellantis' American operations faced steep losses, Ontario's unemployment rate held steady at around 5.6%. Local suppliers saw new orders, and the Windsor-Essex corridor became a magnet for EV investment. In contrast, the U.S. faced the consequences of its own economic nationalism. The Belvidere plant, touted as a symbol of American resurgence, became a financial sinkhole. Labor costs there were roughly 30% higher than in Ontario. Energy expenses soared nearly 40% after the rollback of federal fuel subsidies. And compliance with Buy American rules turned out to be a logistical nightmare. Stellantis was forced to rebuild its supply chain almost from scratch, replacing efficient international networks with slower, less flexible domestic suppliers. The result, production efficiency collapsed. U.S. plants were running at barely half capacity. Thousands of unfinished vehicles sat idle in factory lots, waiting for missing parts. By the end of the year, Stellantis had added more than $3.3 billion in restructuring and depreciation costs. Investors grew restless. Analysts described the move as a political decision disguised as an economic one, a gamble that traded one kind of instability for another. While America wrestled with the fallout, Canada turned quiet resilience into strategy. Rather than trying to compete on noise, it competed on stability. The government doubled down on policies that made the country predictable, a place where contracts meant something, where foreign investors could plan years ahead without sudden rule changes. As Washington grew louder, Ottawa grew steadier. Billions in reinvestment flowed into the Windsor-Essex region. Exports of auto parts to the European Union rose nearly 20% in just one quarter. And on the global stage, Canada began to emerge as a rare safe harbor, a nation where industrial policy wasn't driven by politics, but by pragmatism. It was a powerful contrast. In the U.S., the Stellantis move became a cautionary tale about how protectionism can backfire. What was supposed to bring jobs home instead created inefficiencies and higher prices, while doing little to rebuild true competitiveness. For many manufacturers, it exposed a deeper flaw in America's approach: policy driven by headlines instead of long-term design. In Canada, the same story became proof that calm strategy could outperform loud politics. By embedding flexibility and accountability into its industrial agreements, Ottawa made sure that even when companies moved, they couldn't simply walk away from responsibility. The result was not a perfect victory, but a controlled one. The deeper lesson here goes beyond any single company. It's about how nations define control in an interconnected world. Moving factories may look decisive on paper, but in practice, it tests a country's ability to adapt, to create systems that balance protection with openness, national interest with global cooperation. The Stellantis saga captures a new paradox in modern manufacturing. Borders can't protect value anymore. Real strength lies in stability, in governments that build trust rather than fear, and in companies that understand that short-term political gains often come at long-term financial cost. As analysts now warn, if Washington continues to double down on tariff-based policies, North America's industrial map could shift in ways no one intended, with capital flowing not to the loudest player, but to the most reliable one. And that brings us to the quiet ending of this story. For Stellantis, what began as a patriotic pivot to avoid tariffs has turned into a cautionary lesson about how complexity punishes haste. For the United States, it's a reminder that forcing industry to move doesn't always make it stronger. And for Canada, it's proof that in a world of escalating economic nationalism, calm governance might just be the ultimate competitive edge. If this story gave you something to think about, consider subscribing and liking the video. It helps more people see stories that go beyond the headlines. Thank you for watching.